We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a terrific panel this morning to discuss the findings in the report and also to discuss the impacts that the report might be able to have on education and education systems. This report is part of a three-phase research study. The first phase was a literature review and a scan of all 50 states plus the District of Columbia Public Schools to find out what SEAs are thinking about or actually doing in regard to establishing career continuums for educators. The second phase, which is already underway, is site visits to 10 different locations that are already using some form of a continuum model. Taking what we learn in those first two phases, our third phase will be actually implementing some of the ideas that we see that we believe have the best chance at being sustainable. You'll notice that in the title of the report, the word sustainable is present. We have seen a lot of continuum models over the past 3 years. Very, very good friend, both to NNSTOY and to the Center for Educator Effectiveness at Pearson. He is someone who thinks deeply about issues facing us in education today, and he doesn't only think about them, he does something about them. We are working with Rick on a teacher leadership project. We are very enthused by his commitment to examining teacher leadership, and this career pathway report plays right into that work. So asking Rick to be here with us was a no-brainer. Next to Rick, we have Kathy McKnight. Kathy is the Principal Research Director for the Center for Educator Effectiveness at Pearson. Kathy is someone that I've had the privilege to know for a little bit over a year now, and she is absolutely committed to an excellent education for every child in our nation. And she's using the Research Center as a vehicle to help make the visions that we have of career pathways a reality. Next to Kathy is Katie Natali. Katie is an independent research consultant, and Katie is the primary author of this paper. She did a great deal of the research and a great deal of the writing. Katie is also someone that I've had the privilege to work with several times over the past 5 years, always on a research study. She is a person who comes from the Connecticut Department of Education, where she helped to oversee licensure and certification, teacher preparation, and all of the things that go into creating a sustainable teaching force in her state. She too is absolutely committed to making the ideas presented in this report a reality. Next to Katie, we have Dr. Lynn Gaddis. Lynn is the Illinois State Teacher of the Year 1995. Lynn, I bumped you up a little bit there, but I pulled you back.
I felt a little younger there for a while.
Yeah. Instant fountain of youth. Lynn is not only a consummate classroom practitioner, she is also a very talented researcher. She served in the capacity of teacher researcher on this study. Every research study that NNSTOY does has a State Teacher of the Year, a STOY, or more than one, as a teacher researcher, and Lynn filled that role for us on this study. Kimberly Worthy, next to Lynn, is the DC State Teacher of the Year 2009. Kimberly has a rich background in working in high-needs schools, in high-needs areas, not only here in the United States, but abroad. She is a social studies teacher at the Howard University here in DC. Kimberly also serves on the leadership team of that school and helps to make decisions about who will be hired in what capacity and so on in that role. Jason Camrus is the DC State Teacher of the Year 2005 and is also our National Teacher of the Year 2005. He's here wearing two hats. He's here in his role as an outstanding recognized teacher. He's also here as the Chief of Human Resources for the Public School District. In that role, Chief of Human Resources, Jason I like to say he was the architect of the Impact program. He certainly had a big part in designing it, and now taking that forward into the LIFT program, which is a teacher career pathway model here in the District of Columbia. So that's our panel. Our format, I'm going to ask each of our presenters, Kathy, Katie, and Lynn, a question that they will have up to 6 minutes to respond to. We want to leave as much time as possible for conversation with you. I will then ask each of our discussants one question, same format. We will then turn to you for your questions. And to wrap us up at the end, we're going to do a lightning round with our panelists. One question takes 10 seconds to answer. Any questions? All right, let's get started. I'm going to start with Kathy. Kathy, you lead the Center for Educator Effectiveness at Pearson. You are the person who makes the decisions about what the center will study. And you made the decision that the center would invest heavily in doing this research on continuums, career pathways for teachers. Why did you think that was so important that it needed to be a centerpiece of the center's research agenda? And what did you learn as a result of this study that surprised you?
So the reason that we thought about focusing on career pathways for teachers is because, as all of you know, I'm sure, the research is very strong in telling us that of all the school-based factors, the most important and the one with the highest impact on student learning is the quality of the teacher in the classroom. So, of course, what we're thinking about is efforts that are aimed at attracting and recruiting and retaining the highest quality talent in the classroom. So in my estimation, focusing on career pathways for teachers makes the most sense and has the highest leverage in terms of being able to attract those high quality people. As you will see in our report, we talk about teaching as it's being characterized as the leaky bucket or revolving door sort of field. We have a lot of people coming and going very quickly. And there was a report out, many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with, called the Irreplaceables, talking about the top 20% of our high quality, or they are the high quality teachers. And as one leaves the classroom, it takes about, on average, about 11 hires before you can replace that one person. In addition, that person is gaining 5 to 6 months of learning in their students compared to a low-performing teacher. So if we don't have those high-performing teachers in the classroom, we're losing a lot for our students. So to me, this was a way to approach what is the highest leverage thing we can do to get high-quality people in the classroom with our students. In terms of how to do this, why we think continuums is the way to go, or career pathways is the way to go, I wanted to share with you some work that is relevant to this from the field I come from. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've snuck my way into education. In clinical psychology, we focus on behavioral interventions, and the behavioral sciences over the past 50 years at least have focused on what motivates people. And it's a solid science. There's a lot of great research in there. And Daniel Pink summarizes this in his book, Drive. And I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Pink, but he's been characterized as one of the top writers. He lives in the DC area, actually. One of the top writers in best performances in the workplace. As I was reading Drive, and I was just reading it to learn about, strong performance. It had nothing to do with my work, but it does have something to do with my work, and it has everything to do with continuums of practice. One of the things that he talks about is, and I'm gonna read from this because I think it's so well written. For any job that requires thought, creativity, or problem solving, we don't recommend a focus on concrete rewards or punishments. This is from the research in psychology. Yet there are 3 elements that we should provide to workers in this category. So thought, creativity, or problem solving, to me that describes teachers right there. Autonomy, which is the desire to direct our own lives. Teachers, like every one of us, want to direct their own lives and direct it in the workplace. Mastery, the urge to get better at something that matters. And the third one is purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves, which is really the reason that I've heard most people say they go into the field of teaching. So just quickly, some of the research that helps us to understand what we can apply to continuums and career pathways for teachers in any field. One thing that's very clear is if-then rewards undermine intrinsic motivation. It reduces the autonomy of the worker. So these, if you do this, then we will give you this, does not work. It demotivates people, and this has been established over and over again. Instead, extrinsic rewards should be unexpected and offered as a task is complete. What Pink talks about and summarizes from the research is recognition for a job well done. That's what people want. And we read this in the research on why teachers are leaving the classroom. Our highest performing teachers aren't actually getting recognition for their high performing work, and they're not being differentiated from their colleagues who are lower performing. And that's very, very frustrating. Any of you would be frustrated with that in your job place. In terms of motivation, the single greatest motivator is making progress in one's work. The days that people make progress are the days they feel most motivated and engaged. Think about that from your own work, on those days that you feel great about what you're doing. By creating conditions for people to make progress, shining a light on that progress, recognizing and celebrating progress, organizations can help their own cause and enrich people's lives. And then the final one that I wanted to read out is about success and satisfaction. Research has found there's this term called hygiene factors, and they refer to salary, security, and status. These are crucial for avoiding job dissatisfaction, but they have little impact on job satisfaction. Satisfaction itself depends on growth or motivator factors instead, like interesting work, greater responsibility, and the opportunity to grow. Those are the things that we talk about in this report, that we are focusing on creating autonomy for teachers, allowing them to have opportunities for mastery and growth, and then constantly, I don't think we have to remind teachers the importance of their work and the purpose of their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to go to Katie next. Katie is the principal researcher on this project. You spent a great deal of time looking at what industry does in terms of establishing career pathways. What do you think education can learn from some of the other fields that you looked at? And what do you think education needs to do differently?
I think you're going to find a few of my comments are going to be closely to Daniel Pink, whom I've read and actually is quoted in the report. Actually, I looked at this question from two perspectives. One was other licensed professions, and the second, really the business world. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about other licensed professions because there's been a huge literature that goes back to the mid-'80s, A Nation at Risk. I mean, Linda Darling Hammond, Art Wise, wrote back in the 80s about the fact that other licensed professions are characterized by being self-governing. There are professional licensing examinations that often occur after a sustained period of clinical training or internship. And most of the professions that we did in the report a comparison show forms of career staging or differentiated career paths based upon the acquisition of additional expertise and training. There are some efforts going on. Some of you probably read about the EdTPA that some states are adopting as a licensing exam. Connecticut at one point had a licensing performance-based examination for beginning teachers. But these still remain basically inconsistent, still controversial, and certainly by no means universal. So let's turn a little bit to the business world, which actually I spent the first decade plus of my career in the business world. So I've always been interested in looking at education with an understanding of what goes on in other professions and careers. There have been several instances in which people have talked about the impact of the Great Recession on impacting Gen Y's expectations for their work lives. And that essentially there's probably not going to be the same kind of loyalty to a employer corporation as their parents and grandparents had. It's going to be Gen Y, I think some of Gen X, whatever we want to label them, basically has different drivers and motivators, some of which I think are absolutely applicable to incoming teachers in the profession. But what the Great Recession, I think, has done from a business perspective has made business more aware of the need to focus on human capital development and talent management. And basically saying that unprecedented global competition means we need the most highly qualified people in our workforce, and there is at this point a shrinking pool of really skilled labor to fill particularly the jobs we call the knowledge workers, those people who deal with information, data, creative thinking, and so forth. There's also huge changing family structures. If anyone took a look at the New York Times, there was a great article on women in Wall Street, some of the high paid executives whose husbands now are staying home and taking care of the kids. But we're seeing huge changes in expectations, and many single households, single income households rising, so that it's a different workforce than it was. Basically, there's a push for what we call human capital-centric organizations instead of structure-centric approaches. In other words, looking at organizations. Oh, okay, we're going to move very quickly here. So I'm going to fast forward to this concept of mass career customization in the business world, which is an evolving concept that acknowledges that knowledge workers may not want to sort of see a linear career path climbing up the corporate ladder, but undergo a series of climbs, lateral moves, voluntary descents. You want to take time off, you want to tour the world. And there are people who have taken this concept and applied it to the education world, looking at the concept of neo-differentiated staffing. And that really looks at reconstructing the educator workforce that recognizes differing expectations. You talked here, I think already, I don't need to go into the fact, different rewards, different opportunities for leadership, but it also means restructuring so that educators may be specializing in certain aspects of a student's education with colleagues, with teachers working collegially together, and that the work of teachers may look different. We see use of technology and various ways that, and this is an important terminology you'll hear, extending the reach of expert teachers. And there are other sections of the report that talk about some models where we say we need those irreplaceables, but how do we restructure the workplace and the career and the structure of our schools such that these teachers have greater impact and rewards that go with the differentiated roles.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to move now to Lynn. Lynn, you made the choice to leave the classroom after your service as Illinois State Teacher of the Year, and you entered into a role serving as a teacher in residence with the Illinois State Department of Education, State Board of Education, and then moved on to a position as Director of the National Board Certification Unit at the University, Illinois State University. Why did you make the choice to not stay in the P-12 classroom? And how might having structures like those described in this report have changed your mind?
Well, my choice to leave the classroom was tough, and it took a few years to finalize it because I defined myself as a teacher. I wanted to be with my children and have an impact on them, and I wanted to work with my colleagues. I weighed my teaching and leadership context prior to being named the Teacher of the Year with my goal of wanting to impact a larger number of teachers and students. And so as we worked on this document, I discovered that what is known about the barriers to teachers in career continuums was telling my story of what I had lived as I was making this decision. And it also, working on this, helped me to learn about the conditions of the systems that could have helped me to remain in the classroom, in my school and my district. And that's what I really wanted to do. So at the time of my teaching, my only choices as a leader were to remain in the classroom and work on curriculum, instruction, assessment, and textbook committees, building leadership teams, delivering professional development workshops, mentoring student teachers and new teachers. Whew, no wonder I was so tired. And informally seeking and collaborating with my colleagues, informally. I also continuously sought to learn and partnered with the university, received a master's degree at the time, and went for many hours beyond. and I served as president of the local reading council. I share all of this with you. I don't need to build a resume anymore, but I want you to see that that is what teachers continuously do. However, most of this was done on my own time, in the summer, on the weekend, and when we did do it with district time, we had substitute teachers, which was not good for my students. So leadership was for those who had stamina and personal lives that allowed it to happen. So as a new teacher, I stalked the district mentors who dropped in once or twice a month. And though we know more about teacher induction, our document shows that there are few comprehensive systems that are linked to the other aspects of the teacher's career. I taught for 20 years and made lots of choices to continue my learning as a teacher and to share what I was learning as my expertise grew. And in the document, we talk about Dreyfus and Dreyfus saying it takes 10 years to gain expertise in any professional field. And Berliner says it's 7. We must be truly gifted in education. And I knew from the very beginning that teaching was not rocket science. It was much more complex. And I mean that. I formally sought out respected colleagues as mentors, and I yearned for more time and conditions that would enable me to have a personal life and be a professional and leader rather than squeezing it all in. I love teaching, working with my colleagues, learning and leading. And I did not want to be a principal or a school administrator. So then I was named Teacher of the Year. And I had 18 months sabbatical, and the state superintendent asked me, what is it you want to do in that time? And naively, I thought we could raise the level of the teaching profession in those 18 months. And from that point through the publishing of this document, all of my choices were about how to maximize options for excellent teachers to build their leadership and have an impact on other teachers and their students. So I can go on and on about all of the different things that I did, but I want to share a couple. I worked on state board task forces for teacher quality, and many times I was the only teacher in the room. I was a school reading coach to 3 struggling Chicago public schools where I model taught, conducted feedback time with the teachers, and we had collaborative analysis of teaching. All of those show up in our report as to what the models are showing are effective, and I just wish they had been there for me. Once I was done with my 18 months, I had to leave my district if I wanted to serve as a teacher in residence because there were no systems that allowed me to do that. I wish there had been what we refer to in the document as that the business world uses as mass career customization and neo-differentiated staffing that we have seen, because it would enable me to have been able to make those decisions. I served on every teacher quality, licensing, co-chaired writing of teaching standards. I can go on and on and on. For 11 years, I served as the director of the National Board Resource Center, and I can go on and on about all that work. But Catherine is signaling me. If there had been a sustainable teacher career continuum and pathways, I would have returned to my classroom after my teacher in residency for 3 years, because I wanted to work within my school and colleagues in my district to share what I had learned and to help them to build a stronger school and district. Our document shows that the necessity of a comprehensive, sustainable teacher career pathway is essential. And in part 5 of the document, we highlight promising practices, and the trends among those programs led us to our conclusions that would have let me stay in the classroom. Rethink one classroom or model configuration. Restructure time, scheduling, and other support structures. Implement shared collaborative leadership. Encourage highly effective teachers to assume leadership roles, and implement flexible job systems. These conditions of a system would have enabled me to stay and are vital so that teachers who have reached that expert level may have influence over new and experienced teachers, policymakers, and the collective responsibility of the school, district, and state communities.
Thank you, Lynn. Before we move over and start to hear from our discussants, I'd like to ask you to take a few minutes and talk to an elbow partner, somebody in your area. You can get up and move if you'd like to, about the things that you've just heard through the lens of what do you think it would take to enable systems to put continuum models in place, sustainable continuum models in place. Let's take a couple minutes.
I'm working on a book on the cage busting teacher. Maybe that's what she was alluding to. Teacher.
Oh, really?
So maybe that's it.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you guys had also like a research study notes or something.
It's possible, but nothing that.
You're over.
Yeah, I don't always. But sometimes I'm not always on top of everything I'm doing. So how many folks are in the Teacher Quality Center?
Well, that's a tough question because I have a few part-time employees that are my policy from research and universities to model of getting contractors is the way to go.
So were you faculty? Where were we at?
Yeah, I'm at George Mason University, and I was at
Which unit in George Mason?
psychology. Yeah.
So how's that work? So you're tenure line there, and also,
No, I'm an adjunct.
okay.
I never wanted to go into a full-time as a professor. I love to teach. But funny enough, I didn't want to be held to the research responsibilities as a secondary grant writing and all that. Now I'm doing it anyway.
What are you gonna do?
Exactly.
It's all irony.
So we have.
Let's bring our conversations to a close in 5, 4,
Let's go.
3, 2, and 1. Thank you so much. We're going to turn now to our discussants, Kimberly, Jason, and Rick. And Kimberly, I'm going to start with you. In your school, you are a teacher leader. Can you talk about the kinds of opportunity for leadership that you have currently, and then talk about some of the kinds of opportunities for leadership that you would like to have that continuum models might allow for?
Definitely. Well, currently I serve on our board of directors, which allows me to weigh in on certain policies in our building, hiring factors as well. And this gives me the challenges that I need to continue. I love the classroom, but I do want to weigh in on very important factors in the school. Our hiring is very important to me. The quality of our teachers that we get in, the fact that I can weigh in is very important to me and our colleagues. I'm also on different committees on our board. And our board of directors, many are not educators, so they don't know what is needed in our schools. So I love having a voice for the teachers, and to be an advocate for our teachers and for our students and families. There's so many different stereotypes and misconceptions of our families out there, and many policies that are made regarding our students are just made just based off of myths. And so I'm very encouraged to be able to stand up for teachers, parents, and students. Other teachers have opportunities in our building. Of course, there's chairs of the departments. And then we also have PLC leaders. I would like to do more of the observing of our teachers. We have lots of novice teachers this year. In fact, 12 new teachers came to our building. But our leadership roles have not been formally established. And so there is no time really for our veteran teachers, experts in the building, to observe without having to have coverage, substitute teachers fill in for them, which is not helping our students. So we need a much more formalized structure in our building. Also training for these teacher leadership positions. I'm really inspired by this report because as a board member, I definitely plan to bring this back to show models of continuums that have worked. Because we just don't have that structure. We have ideas, we have needs, right? We have needs in our building for teacher leaders, but we don't have ideas of how this looks and how it should look. I've been given opportunities to conduct action research and to present, but again, yes. But again, what does that do for my students in the classroom? But I love the action research. My most recent was on the state of Black boys in education, and it was a global conference in St. Thomas where educators from around the world came to present on this particular topic. It was very interesting to see how consistent the data was throughout the world. But what I found in my research that I didn't know, I know Howard University Middle School of Mathematics and Science does a great job, but what I found in our research, we actually are closing that gap. Our Black males, last year, 2013, 88% were proficient. White males in DC were 90%. So we're catching up. But that research was exciting. It's important to get out there because we hear so many negative comments about what we're really doing in these schools, but we're doing great things. And so I love to be a part of that research and to be able to present it out. But we need models so that we can support teachers in the classroom and support their drive and their need. I know I have an insatiable need for challenge. And luckily I've had administrators who have seen that in me and other teachers in our building and have created opportunities for us, but it's just not formalized. I'll end there.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, Jason, we're going to move on to you. You're here to add your voice both as a state and national teacher of the year and in your role as chief of human resources for DCPS. You made what I know was a very, very difficult decision to leave the P12 classroom. You gave it a lot of thought. And you took a position eventually which actually helped you to establish the makings of a career continuum model in the district. Why did you choose to leave the classroom? And why did you believe that establishing a structure of continuum model, so to speak, would make a difference and keep teachers like you in the classroom?
Okay. Well, let me just first by thanking you, Catherine, for your leadership of this work. I think this is largely a product of your vision and drive, so thank you for that. And I'm recruiting you to come to DCPS. Whenever somebody says an insatiable desire for challenge, was that what it was? Yeah. That's a good indicator. Why did I leave the classroom? Leaving the classroom was very, very difficult. I love being a teacher. There's nothing quite like the daily rhythm of working with children. I taught middle school, so laughing one minute, crying the next minute, and everything in between. But that is very invigorating and rewarding, challenging, and exciting. But I was presented with an opportunity to begin to make some of the changes at a district level that I had been thinking were necessary. And so as I wrestled with that, I ultimately decided that it was too great an opportunity to pass up, to begin to put into place many of the things that I thought would actually help teachers, would help the school system continue to grow and evolve, bring in more great teachers, to hold on to the many great teachers that we have, and to help many folks improve their practice as well. And so, I went from essentially affecting 135 students every year to potentially affecting 45,000 students every year. That is the work that we began doing, and thinking about the whole spectrum of a teacher's life in the district, from the moment that we reached out to recruit you to the moment that you retired. What does that whole experience look like, and how do we ensure that throughout that entire period we have the very best people, and that it is a very satisfying and enriching career over the course of that time. As for the career ladder, which we recently put in place, it's now in its, I believe, second year, called LIFT. We just thought that was incredibly important because, as the report states, and I think as most teachers and any professional will say, You want great folks who are always looking for a challenge. That to me is one of the greatest indicators of who would potentially be a good teacher. And so to keep individuals like that engaged and excited and satisfied and motivated, you need to continue to think about how do you help them grow and challenge what they're doing. And well, I think it's wonderful for folks who want to go on to leadership, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Become a principal, become a district leader. I think that's fantastic. We also want to carve out the space for folks who love to teach, want to continue to teach, but are also looking for opportunities to stretch themselves a little bit. As you know, in the year 5, 6, 7, 8 of my own career, I had the opportunity to play a greater role in hiring teachers and in helping determine curriculum at the school and all those sorts of things, and that was very rewarding to me. So personally, I sort of viscerally felt that as well. And so that's really the genesis of this, and I think creating those opportunities for teachers is just absolutely essential to keeping those irreplaceables that report speaks to. And there are so many different kinds of things that we can do, whether it's mentoring or peer coaching or helping with curriculum development. I think there's a wide array of things. And actually, we are piloting a number of different roles, even within the career ladder, right now to see which are most effective in helping teachers make an impact, which are most effective in helping affect schools and students, and also which operationally are easiest to pull off. And I know that's sort of a mundane point, but one of the things we also have to think about in school systems is how do you actually set up a school where, if you have 5 of your 25 teachers who aren't teaching full time, what does that mean for a schedule? What does that mean for budgeting? What does that mean for release time and all those sorts of things? And we're trying to figure out all those pieces as well so that we can scale this up across the whole school system. But it's very exciting work, and I think ultimately it will have a profound effect on our school system.
Thank you so much, Jason. Rick, you're currently researching material for a book on cage busting teacher leadership. In doing that work, you're interviewing hundreds of teachers and teacher leaders. What are they telling you about the opportunities that they have to lead now? And what are they telling you about the kinds of opportunities that they wish they had? And how do you think that establishing career continuums would help to meet those needs?
So about 5 points let me just make here, which I think kind of feed into the general tenor of the discussion. First, there are opportunities today for teacher leaders. They exist. They're out there. Problem is that they tend to be one-offs. They tend to be iconoclastic. Teachers have to figure this out with duct tape and bubble gum. It's what I've talked about in cage busting leadership as kind of the MacGyver trap. That individual teachers have been able to develop individual relationships or find an individual way, but it's not very replicable. If you're a hardworking teacher without those contacts or relationships slogging away, you don't necessarily see how you get from here to there. The second point is even for those folks who do have a sense of this, who are the out theres, the Alex Cagetanis, the rapping mathematician types, it's exhausting. That teacher leadership is something that you have to kind of create on your own because it's not woven into the fabric of schools or districts or how we think about the job. And it's not intuitive. Third point is it's not just that the profession is neutral on this, but the profession actually pushes back against teacher leadership the way it's constructed. We've spoken to at least a dozen former state teachers of the year who talked about the suspicion they got from their colleagues when they went back to when they were trying to explain that they had spoken to the governor and the governor wasn't actually crazy but made a fair point, that their colleagues worried they had gone native, had forgotten their roots. The norms of the schoolhouse can be that teachers feel abashed, feel nervous about putting ideas out there. When you speak to, for instance, Evan Stone and Sidney Morris, the founders of Educators for Excellence, they talk about during the New York rifts back in 2009, 2010, talking to their union local leadership about just trying to express their concerns about LIFO and how it was going to affect them. and feeling like nobody wanted to hear their point of view. They felt that it was actually delegitimizing them rather than making them more effective professional leaders. And then third, as far as the culture, there's nothing really in the training or daily experience of teachers that equips them to be leaders. They spend all day in their classrooms with their kids. When they're working weekends or evenings, they're working on instruction and pedagogy and scope and sequence. They have little opportunity to actually sit down with school board members or community leaders or legislators. And so my own personal experience is that when I wind up in front of legislators or teachers, I am often embarrassed for them by the way they go about their public remarks. I find them too often completely uninterested in the challenges from the policymakers' point of view. I find them sometimes snide and dismissive of reasonable efforts and reasonable concerns that district leaders or policymakers have actually brought to the table. I find them frequently focusing their remarks about the need for more resources, seemingly unaware that policymakers are hearing the same kind of concerns from folks in the health professions, from folks who are worried about public safety and higher education. So I think part of this is that the leadership challenges are not just that these roles don't exist, but that the way they exist disconnected from the daily life of the profession means that it's hard for teachers to do them, and when they take these leadership positions, they often aren't equipped to do them well or do them as effectively as possible. So let me, two final points, and then let's open this up. One, as Catherine noted in her opening remarks, none of the ideas about professional continuum and professional growth are new. This is stuff we've been talking about for 40 years. So why would we have any optimism that things are going to be different? For me, I think part of the challenge is that we have this unfortunate habit of pinwheeling between culture and structure in education. You either believe in school culture or you believe in structural change. And that's kind of nuts. One of the challenges, I think, of past decades' works to build career scaffolds and career opportunities is that you've rarely, if ever, really had these deeply woven into the DNA of the teacher leaders in them. The Tennessee career ladders were created by Fiat. If you go back, I wasn't there for that stuff, but talking to folks who were and reading about it, I don't think they ever took ownership. When you've seen stuff like Toledo or Montgomery Parr, these tend to be either isolated examples or examples that are somewhat removed from the policy-making process so that they're not actually supported by structures. So what does that mean? It means a couple things. One, attitudes matter as much as formal opportunities. I think it's fantastic that NNSTOY is taking a leadership role in this stuff, because for this stuff to have a fighting chance, it can't be something done to teachers. It has to be something that teachers are asking for and asking for effectively. Second, it points to the fact that we often have this unhealthy schizophrenia when we talk about teacher professionalism. On the one hand, we have these syrupy bromides offered by advocates and reformers about how much they love teachers and what God-fearing people teachers are. And teachers tell us how wonderful they are and how they're better than everybody else, because they care about everybody else's kids more than anybody else does. And then on the other hand, the same people who have done the pay-ins to teachers turned around and talk about how we've got teachers we need to fire. And the same teachers who tell us how God-fearing and caring they are then turn around and tell us how they feel disempowered and marginalized and yada, yada, yada. And so what we wind up with is this fearsome back and forth. And I think the way out of that fear is that teachers have to take ownership of the changes they want to see. They can't just say we want these things, so I don't care what teachers want. I don't care what doctors want. I don't care what lawyers want. I care what these folks are doing that makes me and mine and my country better off at the end of the day. So the reason that teachers ought to own and advocate for this stuff is not because they want to feel autonomous or they want to feel empowered, but because I find it eminently plausible that we're all going to be better off if we're tapping and cultivating and keeping and growing terrific educators, because they're in a profession where there's opportunities for them to grow. But that needs to be the thrust, and that needs to be the discussion about this. Not teachers feel, but teachers are championing this because it's going to be good for everybody involved in the educational project.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I'd like to open it up now to your questions, the panelists. Young lady.
Hi, my name is Emily Davis. I'm a middle school teacher. Oh, okay. So shout out to all the middle school teachers in here. I don't think I've ever been in a room where I've heard 5 people already say that they've been middle school teachers, so thank you for that. I'm a teacher ambassador fellow at the U.S. Department of Education this year, and I am really excited and fired up about the teacher leadership, these conversations that I'm hearing, and I'm also terrified after over at the department about going back to my classroom, partially in fear because I do not want to leave my classroom. I'm terrified of leaving my classroom. I share your sentiments, and I'm feeling just kind of hearing all of you speak, especially Rick, to your point about so many times I feel that cultural piece is separate from the structure of change, and really how do I, when I return, go about integrating that? Many times I'll get back to my class and I'll get back to my school and I'll talk to my district leaders and they get fired up about it, and I really try to get that first, I guess I'm wondering what that first spark is. What is that first really need to do to help teachers be motivated, to get that intrinsic motivation, to help them to want to take that ownership, and to ultimately help my district with the culture piece and the structure of change. So just wondering what you think that first priority should be of mine when I return to my district. Thank you.
Panelists, any ideas?
I'll offer a thought. I'm not sure it's the first thing you do.
Story?
Well, I worked, back when I was at the Connecticut Department of Education and our program, we had usually in a given year 10 to 20 leaders working on staff with the few of us who were somewhat bureaucrats. And they brought life and they created, I think, the quality of our programs. And out of that, we also attempted to work on a teacher leadership academy, which was how do you take your leadership role that you're performing, either connected to the state work we were doing, and bring it back to your district and to your colleagues. And it was very instructive. What it taught me is that one of the most persuasive means to engage your colleagues is when you are able to show them that your kids are doing really well. Because one of the things I think teachers want is they want, no matter who they are, they want their kids to do well. And that became often, we engaged our teacher leaders in action research, collecting data, looking, instructional interventions, then tracking progress of students. And when they were able to sit down with their colleagues and show that their kids were learning at higher levels, the doors started to open. And so that was a way of trying to deal with the culture issue. That's not an easy and that's not a short-term fix. It's one that I thought was the most effective when teachers wanted to affect their colleagues and not be, everybody wants to profit from outside their district or whatever.
So Katie, it sounds like you're saying build that credibility with colleagues and do it in part through student performance.
Yes.
The initial thought that always comes to my mind when I hear that question is you need to win over your administration, but it sounds like you've already done that. So you're a step ahead of the game.
I guess I would also say every school, every district is going to be contextual. And so we had this lengthy conversation last night about how you need to know what is it that they want. What are their goals and where are they going? And what is the district doing? What are the teachers in those schools? And then how do you begin to come together to create those common goals? And I think this sounds like it's trite, but if you come in saying, here's what I've learned and I want this, then it isn't what Rick was talking about, everybody buying into it. But what is it, I always said to my principal, what do you need for me to do a good job? For me to make my own decisions? And then I worked very hard to be able to make sure that that could all happen within that culture. And it will be different in every school.
There's a larger point here. It was really well said. If a student comes to a teacher and says, "Teach, look, I want to do this cool. I need you to come up with $500. I need you to get us 30 days out of class this year. And by the way, you're a lousy teacher, which is why we need to do this." Not many teachers are going to be hyper responsive. On the other hand, if the same student comes, "Hey, teach, I've got an idea how we can raise to 500. I think what you're doing works, but it doesn't actually meet everything that we're excited about. And could we explore some way to get some release days? We can do this." I think most teachers are going to be much more responsive. When you talk to principals, when you talk to superintendents, they too often feel like teachers come to them, start by bad-mouthing what's going on, and then tell them what they need. And I think when those same teachers show up and say, "Look, we're all in the same boat, we've got problems we want to solve together. Here's how I've thought it through, here's a possible solution, here's how you can help me make that solution work," I think they are often surprised at how warmly they're received.
Another question.
Could I add one more thing to that? before we
Absolutely,
move
Kath,
on?
go ahead.
I was just thinking of the, going back to my theme earlier about what we know from the behavioral sciences and in terms of human change. One of the things that people need in order to change is a model of what it's going to look like when they do change. And I'm thinking if you go in and you have just this general idea that we need a continuum model, that's not very helpful. But if you do some research with your colleagues, however you want to do it, but there are some great models out there, and to maybe interview some of the schools that are implementing these models. Catherine and I've been lucky enough to be able to interview and conduct focus groups with a couple of sites already as part of that second phase of the research she was talking about. When you see what it looks like, it's really motivating. And not only just seeing what it looks like, but understanding how did you guys get here? What did you have to start with? What are the potential barriers and what are the supports you need? I think so having a model of what it looks like so people can envision themselves in that place, I think that's very helpful too.
Great point. Question right here in the front.
Hi. I a point Rick made about
Can
the
you
suspicion.
share your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Saroja Barnes. I'm a teacher, as my friend Dennis Van Rokel says, just not practicing right now. I'm an AACTE. Rick made a comment earlier about the suspicion and the going native, right? The label. And just to contextualize the question I have, I taught for a number of years. Public schools. I went through national boards, looking for those opportunities. I decided to go back and do a PhD. A school-based problem was the topic of my dissertation with the intention of coming back. And I faced that suspicion when I came back to the classroom from my colleagues. I remember one colleague saying, when you go off and you get that PhD, and you're in the ivory or don't go back to the classroom. The question was always, well, what's next? Are you going to apply for a tenure line position somewhere? And I said, no, actually, I kind of want to do both. I want to teach here part-time and teach at the high school part-time so that they were informing each other. So the question I really have is, in your research, in the study, did you see any models where there were maybe productive partnerships between higher ed and school systems support a sustainable career pathway? Sort of the teachers in school districts and the universities are partnering in the preparation and growth of new teachers or the professional development of, existing teacher pools.
I had a conversation. Hopefully, maybe you guys have some positive news here. I remember having this conversation with Deborah Ball, a terrific dean at the University of Michigan, about 4 or 5 years ago on this. And what we were talking about was there's a chicken and egg dynamic here. That there's opportunities to think about environments and team teaching environments, new job descriptions, new teacher roles, and what would it take to rethink kind of their, not even the partnership you're talking about, but just teacher preparation in a way that creates training opportunities for teachers to play new roles. And she said, the tricky thing is if we want to talk about that, I'm not sure where they would go get their job. And then you talk to districts or even charter schools that are held up as, and they go, well, we can't go too far because nobody's training people for new job descriptions. So one of the challenges like to create a partnership between training programs and some alpha sites, what Tony Brake has talked about out at Carnegie, where you could actually explore new training for new career models and placement for those folks. Because otherwise, it's hard to imagine who's going to step first.
The only thing I would say is I was actually pretty disappointed because I did try to look at higher education, and I did speak to some people. There's obviously higher education has a tremendous interest in states that start creating these teacher leader endorsements because it creates for them a market for coursework, inputs, is so that they get revenue from doing such things. When it comes to a sustained partnership, I think back to the lab school models that existed 20, 25, 30 years ago, but they're very few and far between. And I think part of that is the intractability, or I wouldn't say intractability, that sounds awful negative, difficulty in both affecting our higher education institutions that prepare teachers and teacher leaders, by the way, because no teacher leader can be effective without the support of their principal and superintendent. So there's a huge role for leadership programs. But even, Teachers for a New Era, the Carnegie funded initiative, I saw great efforts, but didn't seem to produce a lot. I could see funding drive. Wallace Foundation worked in my own state on a grant, and we were pushing teacher leadership as a continuum into looking at the overall school leadership. Again, money dries up. I don't know where these things get sustained. We're in this decentralized system, and that's, I think, we need some leadership. AACTE, your organization, I think, and Sharon Robinson is doing some, she's pushing. I similar to Catherine pushing for teacher leaders, she is pushing for more comprehensive, rigorous training and a role for higher ed. We still have a long ways to go.
And I would just add that, and it's an old concept and it works in some places and doesn't in others, but the idea of true professional development schools where there's I'm from Illinois State University with a very wonderful teacher ed program. And there are a few of our professional development schools are really excellent in that the whole district is partnered with the university, and we've been there over 20 years, and the faculty have degree programs that come through their school district. They get their master's or doctorates. They end up becoming part of the Illinois State University teacher ed. They interact with faculty go there. It's a really true partnership. And then, so the whole development of a year placement of those students, then they become hirees and go through induction programs that are aligned to what happened in student teaching clinicals that were there. So my point is it's a beautiful program that doesn't happen in every professional development school system, but that's what it could look like.
And I would just add, and I'm sure that you're already familiar with these folks' work, Artwise and Molly Lasagna have both done some dreaming, some visioning about how such partnerships could work. I worked with a group of 6 states for 2 years to develop a common continuum model, and built into that continuum model, higher ed was a critical piece of it. Each state identified a higher ed institution that prepares teachers and was innovative and had vision. And each of those programs identified a school district with whom they worked. And they were all to be part of a pilot program that never got off the ground because of lack of funding. But the vision was not only would the teacher prep institutions be engaged at the pre-service level, but as teachers moved across that continuum through the different stages, there were 4 stages, teacher prep would play a critical role in training those teachers for those new stages as they went through their life cycle. So lots of dreams.
Lacking money, though.
I'll send you a couple documents describing that model. Questions? Nothing? Go ahead.
Mike, I can project.
Use your teacher voice.
My name is Rob Wood. I work at 50CAN. We're an Ed Reform advocacy organization, and I do policy and research. And so, Catherine, in light of what you were saying about what motivates people, I'm curious, if you have any recommendations around what the best way to incorporate new pay structures together with career ladders would be. And so I know how it works in DC with Lyft kind of being alongside the impact system. And so would you describe that as a kind of best practice model, or, I mean, how would you see pay fitting into a career ladder system in the most effective way possible?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, so I'm going to let my colleagues answer it as well. But in terms of, I do know from the research on pay that, one of the, I wrote down this great quote, you got to hear it, it's, Daniel Pink wrote it in the book, and I just thought it was an interesting way of putting pay in perspective. It says, where is it? To take the issue of money off the table. So, but essentially what he's saying, and this is in the research on compensation as reward, that there is a hurdle, a low level, that a basic amount that is acceptable, and once you get through the basic amount people need, then that's not the issue that people are concerned about in terms of staying with their job. So in terms of what is the basic amount or the amount that takes the issue of pay off the table, I don't know what that amount is for teachers and in terms of the different roles. So I'll leave what I have to say about that right there, because I think we have more expertise here in terms of the question, which is melding it in model, and that is an issue that we cover in the report. Katie, did you have something?
Well, I was going to offer, I was looking for my citation, but the report's so damn long I couldn't find it quickly enough. I can say that. Johnson and Pape, if I pronounced that correctly, wrote a couple years ago, policy piece on differentiated pay compensation schemes. And they drew actually upon success in even the corporate world in terms of merit pay. And there's a very mixed record about, as you've talked about, the effectiveness of doling out, or creating fair compensation systems. And instead they propose like a multi-tiered system of differentiated roles for teachers that correlate to career stages, with compensation systems designed to both correlate to knowledge, expertise, and role. We do see certain states have, especially those who are recipients of Race to the Top, have launched into initiatives to tie in measures of teacher effectiveness to compensation schedules and sometimes roles. And there's a lot of controversy over defining teacher effectiveness. What are we using? Student gain scores on standardized tests. If anybody wants to read an excellent paper by Ed Hartle on the validity of use of value-added scores, it's not saying there isn't some validity, but we have to be very careful how we use them. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but I check out that, again, that Pape and Susan Moore Johnson publication is a vision. We may be seeing elements of it in DC Lyft. I mean, I think we're starting, there are a lot of things churning in different places. They're not yet existence proofs. But I hope in the next few years they emerge that way.
We're at a place, I think, where we're moving from pay for longevity to pay for performance, which is where we are now, to pay for role. What role are you playing? What stage of development are you at? Let's compensate. I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Jason?
I just wanted to make 3 points, sort of linking these things together. One is, I generally agree with this notion that you need to pay people enough, so that's not an issue. And where that number lies depends on the particular circumstances of the context. And I think we've made, just to reflect on the context, enormous strides in that respect. So I survey teachers now, and they articulate the reasons they stay or go. Pay is always on the bottom of the list of reasons why that factors into that decision. So I think we have empirically eliminated an issue for teachers in DC, which is a pretty remarkable thing for an urban public school system to be able to say. But it was a dramatic shift. So if you are high performing, and this will get to my second point, you can make in excess of $100,000 after 7 years in DC now. Right? Now, when I started teaching in 1996, I made $26,000. So yes, a lot of time has passed since then, but still, this is a pretty remarkable shift. The second point is, yes, I think you need to pay people enough such that it's not an issue, but I think related to that is if across the spectrum of performance, people are more or less getting paid the same thing, that is actually, I believe, and our internal research suggests, problematic for the retention of high performers, right? Usually high performers, for good or not, think about their status and their place in the world relative to everybody else. And so you could have a relatively meaningless sounding title, but if it was the top title, you'd get really excited about it. And so similarly speaking, I think, yes, you want to get a certain threshold of pay, but then you also need to have differentiation such that if you are one of the irreplaceables, yeah, you better get paid a lot more than other folks that are quote unquote average. Also raising the floor, my first point. The last is, to your point, Catherine, I do think there's this, I think there's a middle ground between pay purely based on performance and pay purely based on the roles that you play. I'm skeptical sometimes of pay just based on the roles you play, because I think we've actually wasted a lot of money in public education by paying people extra for roles that were ill-defined. So in many school systems across America, you have department chairs, grade level chairs, and usually maybe there's a $2,000 stipend or something of that nature. But very often there's no meat to those roles. And so what are you actually getting out of that? And that's not good for the kids, it's not good for the teachers either. That being said, I think not recognizing when there are meaty roles that teachers are taking on, mostly they want to take them, they want new challenges. I think at the same time, to give them something a little bit extra to do that makes sense. I think we just need to keep that in mind.
Add one thing. One of the collaborators, or I should say, on this project as a whole is Public Impact. They're piloting a very different way of looking at staffing schools, and it is designed to really significantly restructure staffing roles, and I say teacher roles, such that it doesn't necessarily require an external infusion of new money, but at the same time, back to the terminology I used earlier, extends the reach of highly effective teachers by using a combination of technology or teachers who oversee larger numbers of students with other instructional assistants working with them. I suspect it may be in some circles controversial, but I think it's definitely worth looking. They're expecting, I think in 2014, to release the results of a study as to how effective that is in terms of raising student achievement. So I would keep an eye on their work that they're doing in the next year or so.
Okay. Any other questions for the panel? Yes, here and then there.
Hi, I'm Eunice Ahenkra from the National Council of La Raza, and I have a quick question on teacher preparation. One thing that did catch my attention was the comment on teacher preparation and how it has a really good vision, but it lacks funding in some way. And a lot of teacher preparation projects, implying from what you said, haven't really been able to move through to the final stage. So based on that, are there teacher preparation programs currently that are working and have been able to kind of seep through the system and find a way around the funding issue? if you know anyone in the audience or the panel may know something about that.
I wouldn't say the key issue with teacher preparation is funding. I'd actually argue it's a quality issue, and sort of what those programs are, what exactly they're teaching and not teaching, and how exactly they're preparing teachers. And in fact, I think as a generalization, though certainly not true of all programs, many teacher preparation programs are actually sources of revenue for schools and get a lot of money, but are not adequately preparing teachers, particularly for the challenges of teaching today, particularly for the world driven by Common Core and lots of other challenges. So I would say that is the key issue for many teacher prep programs.
There's, and I would completely agree with Jason there, and I'd say there's two dimensions to this. One is just the caliber of preparation in terms of pedagogy, curriculum, and that's an open question. But there's a second, which is preparing teachers to operate in the manner we're talking about here as autonomous professionals. Now, one of the key, it's funny, I was up at Columbia on Monday for the Gordon Commission thing around testing, and one of the points that I thought got remarkably little play, but John Matus of Harvard said it very clearly, is look, professions either self-regulate or they are externally regulated. It's just that simple. And going back to Dan Lordy and beyond, teaching has been very much a passive profession. And in fact, teachers tend to talk about how frustrated they are that they're being acted upon. Well, this is true of any profession where the policymakers and the public don't trust that you're safeguarding their interest. This is what happens in New York with stop and frisk, when the public or the new mayor decides they don't actually trust the police to use their own judgment. It's what you see with regulation of healthcare payments, and it's what you see in education. It's not enough for educators to say we're frustrated. If educators want to shape the kinds of decisions, they want to shape their profession, they want to create opportunities for themselves, they have to win the confidence of the people who are spending the public's money and writing the rules about how 50 million kids are educated. And ed schools, teacher preparation, I would argue, does nothing at all, when you look at the curricula, when you look at courses, when you look at the books assigned, to help future teachers learn this stuff, think about it, take it seriously. When you look at teacher preparation, when you look at professional development, there is nothing that speaks to this. As part of this Cage-Busting Teacher Project, we've looked at the 30 most recommended books for new teachers. They entirely talk about teaching, especially for early career teachers, as a survival project. Teachers are trapped in the classroom. How do teachers make do with unsupportive principals? How do they deal with a challenging student? There is nothing that talks honestly, bluntly, and unapologetically with teachers about how do you call out mediocrity? How do you win the confidence of people outside the schoolhouse so that you will be taken seriously as a thinker? So not only do we have to do better on the stuff that Jason alluded to, but there's a whole second half of what it means to be an empowered professional that I don't think teacher preparation or professional development has done so much as scratch the surface.
Thank you, Rick.
Hi, my name is Tim Finkley. I'm also from the AACT. Sorry. This question is for Jason. What is the district doing to recruit teachers of color, and namely teachers of color who are male?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is a key priority area for us this year in particular. We have expanded the recruitment team, quite frankly, just to make sure that we are getting greater reach with a greater attention on HBCUs, but also tapping into a lot of networks that are existing African American male, African American female, and other teachers have in our school system. What we have found is one of the best ways to bring teachers of color into the system. We get a lot of applicants already, but to increase it even further is that human connection. So individuals who are already in the system who can articulate to a colleague or a friend why DCPS is a good place for them to come and teach. And so we're really trying to leverage those connections and then the networks that they have, in addition to much more aggressive recruitment, as I said, at HBCUs and other places across the country. I do think this is a very critical issue that we are continuing to pay attention to. And not just on the African American male side, though that is certainly important. We have a growing Latino population in DC, and while I don't necessarily believe that every child needs to have a teacher of the same background, I do think it is important to have a very diverse teaching force, particularly in a city as diverse as DC. And so that is another area that we're certainly trying to pay more attention to as well.
Any other questions before we close out? Yes.
My name is Sherry Wallach. I'm the network coordinator at Teach Plus here in DC. My question is, everyone keeps mentioning these models and that they're out there, they're working in some places, they're maybe not in others. Has anybody found when teachers release and do we see that as a barrier as we move forward?
Want to try?
I'll take that one. We do see models like this. There are models where special arrangements, so to speak, have been made in order to enable teachers to take on the kind of role that you described. One example of those is in New Jersey. The New Jersey State Teacher of the Year is awarded a 6-month sabbatical. And so for 6 months, or for, I guess it's 5 months, 4 months, they're in the classroom. And then for 6 months, they spend that time outside of their own classroom. And they could be in other people's classrooms, working with other teachers, working with the State Department of Education in policy, whatever the requirements of that role in that particular year may happen to be. And that's been worked out. Another example, I can think of several State Teachers of the Year who are working in their own classroom part-time, and then part of the day they're working outside of their classroom. Sarah Brown Westling would be one. Part of the day she is in her own classroom teaching her students. She is out doing other kinds of work in the policy area and in modeling for other teachers. Megan Allen from Florida was in a hybrid role last year. She, half of the day, was in her own classroom. Half of the day, she was out working on policy issues with the state of Florida. So these models do exist. The union contract is always, I wouldn't say an obstacle, but it's something that has to be dealt with, right? I mean, most contracts don't allow yet for these kinds of things. I'm quite confident that in the future they will. But right now, those special arrangements often have to be made in order to release the teacher for that period of time.
So I mean, I think Catherine's right, but I will be bleaker than Catherine is. I think one, this gets us, certainly there are impediments in contracts to doing this stuff. And one of the consequences is this stuff tends to be one-offs and workarounds. So you cut a deal with a principal or an assistant soup, that person moves to a new job, it's no longer institutionalized, teachers have to figure out how to do this all over again. It also means that there's not actually a critical mass of changing the culture in a district or a school. It means that this stuff is one-off and occasional. So that's something, just to be conscious of. Look, a second point about all this, though, and Celine Coggins, who founded Teach Pluses, we were talking about this with her just the other day, is that what we tend to do is when we talk about these continual and changed roles, we tend to lump a lot of stuff together. So for instance, one thing we're talking about is teachers teaching maybe half of the instructional day, but spending more time coaching their peers and helping develop lesson plans. All of this, which still leaves them in the schoolhouse, which doesn't necessarily enable them to lead in terms of changing district policy or whatnot. But it does mean, like anybody who's gotten a promotion in any line of work, they're probably working longer, they've got more responsibility, they've got more headaches. But there's also other kinds of continua where you're now, part of what a teacher is doing is getting to go around and talk to policymakers and be an ambassador and kind of have fun and be out there and have their voice heard. And frankly, if you work in a law firm, if you're that kind of public face, you probably depending on, if you're not actually bringing in real concrete business, but you're just out there, you're actually not going to make as much money for that as you would. So one of the things is when we talk about differentiated pay being mapped onto differentiated roles, we need to just think kind of unapologetically about, are these roles where you're clearly doing more good work on behalf of the kids in the organization, or are these roles where you're getting opportunities to grow and do cool stuff that's important, but that isn't necessarily worthy of additional compensation?
Okay. Any other questions? We're going to close out by asking our panelists to kind of do a lightning round here, 10 seconds to answer one question. So Jason, I'm going to start with you. Same question for everybody. What is one key takeaway that struck you in reading or researching this report?
I think just that creating a space for these kinds of roles is absolutely critical to keeping great teachers.
Okay, thank you. Kimberly?
Formalizing these types of continuums it's still a major need in the schools. So we have these great ideas, but it may be working in some schools, but it's not universal. And we need to come up with ways to formalize it. And so that's my key takeaway.
Thank you. Lynn?
In working on the research, Katie and I interviewed someone from all of the 50 states to see where they are and what they're doing. And the big aha for me was how isolated and how disjointed everything we're doing is, that there's nothing comprehensive, there's no grand scheme, plan, structure going out there. It's just an individual in this department working on this, maybe evaluation, someone over here working on teacher leadership, someone over here on licensing, and there's no thought as to how all this fits together. So at the state level, I'm just going to be very blunt, I don't see the leadership and vision for it to come from an impact from the state level.
Thank you,
At this
Lynn.
point.
I guess Lynn and I were heavily influenced by that extensive research, because basically my moment is a state agency, state licensing agency representative said to me, "You have a solution in need of a problem." And I disagree. We have a solution in need of the professions and the public's understanding of the seriousness that we have in terms of recruiting the best and the brightest into our nation's classrooms. And there are roles that we need to educate state and local boards of education, state and local teachers associations. It can't just, I mean, we're all here in DC, but it's got to penetrate down or the status quo will be maintained.
Okay, Kathy?
What I have to say is exactly what these folks have said, that it can't be an add-on. What we've done is, when we were collecting data at one of the sites, it was very clear that this continuums model was actually competing with other initiatives that the school and the district had to meet, and there was no thought in terms of how to merge the two or get rid of some things and make others happen, so that lack of vision. And then the other thing I just want to add is there are good models out there, and we have some in the report here, and we're going to do some site visits with up to 10 of them now. So it's very helpful to know that there are good models out there and to look at how they're doing it.
Great.
I thought the report did a nice job, made me think of school turnarounds, that it was a reminder that lots of smart people have been trying to do this for 40 or plus years. Mostly we've been unimpressed by the results, and that what matters is not whether you do it, but how you do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick. And in closing, I would like to sincerely thank the Fordham Institute for hosting us today. NNSTOY being a brand new organization, we're, I think, 13 months old now. I'm often reminded of Blanche Dubois, in some ways, not in others, saying, "I must always rely upon the kindness, in this case, not of strangers, but of friends." And the Fordham Institute has been a very, very valued friend to NNSTOY, and in giving us the space and equipment and personnel for today for our work with Pearson. Just very, very, very grateful. Mike Petrelli wanted to be here to welcome you to his house, but he had another commitment, and so I'm inadequately doing that for him. Just been great, great partners. We seem to have a small snafu with lunch, but we're teachers, so we can be flexible. Why don't you chat among yourselves for 60 seconds and let me go find out what's going on. And I will remove my microphone this time.